Pirates built ships without shipyards, blueprints, or formal training, yet their vessels could outrun and outfight the world's best. How was that possible? What exact steps did they take with nothing but raw wood and stolen tools? Well, finding the right wood for a pirate ship meant more than just chopping down the nearest tree. Pirates needed massive amounts of quality timber, and getting it required creativity, connections, and sometimes outright theft. Most pirates didn't bother with legal lumber purchases. They raided coastal forests under cover of darkness, cutting down trees without asking permission. These midnight operations happened quickly, with lookouts posted to watch for angry landowners or government officials who might interrupt their illegal harvesting. The black market became their shopping mall. Corrupt suppliers would sell quality wood to anyone with enough gold coins and fewer questions. These deals happened in shadowy taverns where business got done with handshakes instead of contracts. Bribe port officials looked the other way when suspicious timber shipments arrived. Different types of wood served different purposes. Oak was the champion of hull construction. This hardwood could take punishment from storms and battles without rotting. Oak was basically the bodyguard of the wood world. Tough, reliable, and not easily intimidated. Pine filled a different role. Lightweight and easy to shape, pine became the go-to choice for masts and upper sections. Speed mattered just as much as strength, and pine helped keep the weight down while maintaining structural integrity. The tall, straight grain patterns made it perfect for creating flexible masts. Teak was the luxury option most pirates could only dream about. This tropical hardwood handled heat and moisture better than almost any other material. Most pirates only got teak by capturing it from wealthy merchant ships or raiding tropical ports where expensive timber was stored. Some pirates took a different approach entirely. Instead of starting from raw logs, they captured small merchant vessels and stripped them for building materials. These floating hardware stores provided pre-shaped beams ready for immediate use. Breaking down existing ships saved months of cutting and shaping work. The harvesting process was brutal manual labor. Pirates used axes and two-man saws to cut massive trees. Every log had to be moved using wooden carts and pure muscle power. No shortcuts existed for this back-breaking work. Teams of men worked in shifts to keep the operation moving quickly. Smart pirates seasoned their wood properly. Fresh-cut logs needed weeks of air drying to prevent warping once the ship hit salt water. Desperate crews sometimes used green wood and paid the price with leaky vessels that required constant repairs. Properly seasoned timber could mean the difference between a seaworthy ship and a floating disaster. Many crews established temporary camps near coastlines to avoid transporting heavy logs long distances. Bad wood was like a fair-weather friend. It looked fine until you really needed it to hold up under pressure. Experienced pirates developed an eye for spotting weak timber before it became a problem. Getting quality timber was just the beginning of the shipbuilding challenge. The actual construction of a pirate ship started with laying the keel, a massive beam that would become the backbone of the entire vessel. The keel had to be perfectly straight and incredibly strong because everything else would be built around it. This single piece would support the entire ship's weight and provide the foundation for all frames and planking that followed. A crooked or weak keel would doom the entire project from the start. Shaping the frames came next. These curved ribs gave the ship its shape and determined how it would move through water. Pirates used axes and adzes to carve each frame, following rough templates when available or relying on experience. Each rib had to match specific measurements to create a balanced hull design. Each frame had to be precisely positioned to create a hull that would cut through water efficiently while staying stable. The curve affected everything from speed to cargo capacity to whether the ship would tip over in strong winds. Mathematical precision wasn't their strong suit, but pirates learned through trial and error. Hull planking was where real craftsmanship showed. Pirates had two main methods. Lap strake meant overlapping planks like roof shingles, while carvel planking fitted them edge to edge for a smooth surface that reduced water resistance. The choice often depended on available materials and crew skills. Bending wood into proper curves required innovation. Pirates built makeshift steam boxes or used heated sand to make timber flexible. It was like trying to convince a stubborn plank to dance. You needed heat, pressure, and patience. Some crews even used boiling water and heavy stones to achieve the right curves. The scale was staggering. A small sloop required 50 to 100 trees just for basic construction. Medium-sized vessels needed even more lumber plus materials for interior spaces and specialized storage areas. The amount of raw material needed often surprised inexperienced builders. Assembly took place on wooden stocks or prepared beaches where gravity could assist with launch. Pirates had to position everything so the finished ship could reach deep water without getting stuck on land permanently. Planning the launch site was as important as building the ship itself. Recycling materials was practical and necessary. Wood from captured ships found new life as reinforcement pieces. A dull axe was about as useful as a wet match when trying to shape ship timbers. Smart crews maintained their tools religiously to avoid delays and accidents. Quality control required constant attention. Each joint had to be tight, every angle correct, and all elements aligned properly. Mistakes made early would cause problems throughout the entire project and potentially sink the finished vessel. Experienced carpenters checked and double-checked every connection. All this careful construction work meant nothing if water could get inside. Keeping ocean water outside the ship was literally a matter of life and death. So pirates developed various techniques for waterproofing their wooden vessels. Caulking was the primary defense against leaks. This process involved stuffing oakum, hemp fibers soaked in tar, into every gap between hull planks. The work was tedious, messy, and absolutely essential for survival at sea. Even the smallest gaps could let in enough water to eventually sink a ship. Pirates got tar from several sources. Some crews boiled pine resin to create their own pitch, while others bought ready-made tar from smugglers who didn't ask questions about their customers' intentions or activities. The quality of tar made a huge difference in how long the waterproofing would last. Application required skill and endurance. Hot tar had to be brushed into seams, then forced deep into gaps using specialized caulking irons. Working with tar was like wrestling with a giant ball of hot taffy that fought back. The sticky substance got everywhere and burned skin on contact. When tar supplies ran low, pirates got creative. Animal fat worked as emergency gap filler. Beeswax provided temporary sealing for smaller cracks. Pine sap could be harvested directly but required processing to become useful waterproofing material. Desperate crews sometimes used clay mixed with animal hair as a last resort. Hull sheathing added extra protection. Some pirates attached additional planks to the hulls outside, creating double wall systems that helped prevent leaks and protected against marine borers that loved eating wooden ships. These creatures could destroy a hull from the outside in just months. Copper sheathing was the ultimate upgrade, but few pirates could afford it. This metal protection was incredibly effective, but most came from captured merchant vessels that had been stripped of valuable materials. Installing copper required specialized skills that few pirate crews possessed. Maintenance never ended once the ship launched. Wood expands and contracts with temperature changes. New gaps appeared constantly, requiring ongoing attention during calm weather when crews had time for repairs. The tropical sun and salt water created constant challenges for waterproofing materials. Bilge pump systems were essential backup plans. No wooden ship was ever completely watertight, so hand-operated pumps removed water that inevitably found its way inside through tiny gaps and structural movement. The rhythm of pumping became a constant sound on any wooden vessel. Cheap caulking was like using tissue paper for bandages. It might work temporarily, but you'd regret it later. Quality materials made all the difference in long-term performance and crew survival. Pirates learned quickly that cutting corners on waterproofing was a deadly mistake. A watertight hull was useless without the ability to actually move through water. Creating the wind-powered systems that would actually move a pirate ship required specialized knowledge, quality materials, and precise installation techniques. Mast construction began with selecting the right timber. Single tall pine trees made ideal masts, but these giants were rare. More commonly, pirates joined hardwood sections together, creating composite masts strong enough to support massive sails and survive violent storms. Finding perfectly straight trees tall enough for main masts was often the biggest challenge. The main mast was the most critical component. This central pole carried the largest sail and took the most punishment from wind forces. It had to be perfectly vertical and securely anchored to distribute stress throughout the hull structure. A fallen mainmast could leave a ship helpless in enemy waters. Standing rigging consisted of ropes and cables that held masts upright against wind pressure. These lines had to be incredibly strong because a single failure could bring down an entire mast and leave the ship helpless. The web of supporting cables looked complex but followed specific patterns that experienced sailors understood instinctively. Running rigging controlled the sails themselves. These rope systems allowed crew members to raise, lower, and adjust sails based on conditions. A medium-sized pirate ship used 3,000 to 4,000 feet of rope for basic operations alone. Managing all these lines required coordination and experience. Hemp rope was standard material but demanded constant care. Pirates coated ropes with tar to improve durability and resist saltwater rot. Untreated rope in ocean conditions lasted about as long as ice cream in a furnace. Regular maintenance included checking for frayed sections and replacing worn segments before they failed. Sail construction was handled by specialized crew members who understood fabric properties. Canvas was preferred when available, but hemp cloth worked as backup. Every stitch had to withstand violent forces when wind caught the fabric during storms or battles. Sailmakers were among the most valued crew members on any ship. Spare sails were essential because damage was inevitable. Battles, storms, and normal wear constantly threatened sail integrity. A ship with torn sails couldn't escape enemies or outrun weather, making replacement sails crucial for survival. Smart captains carried enough spare canvas to replace every sail if necessary. Blocks and pulleys were carved from hardwood and functioned as mechanical advantage systems. These devices allowed small crews to manage enormous sails that would otherwise require dozens of people to operate effectively. The mechanical advantage meant a single man could control forces that would normally require 10. It was like maintaining a giant, complicated musical instrument that lived in the most destructive environment on Earth. Ropes stretched and frayed, sails developed tears, blocks wore out constantly from heavy use. Every component needed regular inspection and maintenance. Having a fast ship was great, but pirates needed more than speed to be successful. Converting a basic vessel into a proper pirate warship required extensive modifications to handle weapons, combat situations, and the specific needs of crews who made their living through maritime robbery. Deck reinforcement was the foundation of all weapon installations. Standard merchant ship decks weren't built to handle tremendous recoil forces from multiple cannons. Pirates added extra support beams throughout the structure to prevent their own weapons from destroying the ship. The deck had to be strong enough to support thousands of pounds of artillery. Gunport placement required careful engineering. Each cannon opening had to provide good firing angles while maintaining hull strength. Too many holes weakened the structure. Too few limited combat effectiveness and reduced the ship's intimidation factor. Pirates had to balance firepower against structural integrity in every design decision. Cannon selection depended on ship size and crew ambitions. Medium-sized pirate vessels typically mounted 4 to 20 cannons, ranging from small anti-personnel weapons to serious ship killers that could punch holes through enemy hulls. Heavier guns meant more destructive power, but also more weight and complexity. Swivel guns were like enormous shotguns that could rotate to follow targets. These smaller weapons were designed for close-range work against enemy crews during boarding actions, when pirates needed to clear opposing decks quickly. They could be loaded with various types of shot for different tactical situations. Securing heavy cannons presented unique challenges. These weapons weighed thousands of pounds and generated massive recoil forces. Iron brackets and thick ropes held them in position while allowing aiming adjustments during combat situations. Loose cannons could destroy a ship from the inside during rough weather. Elevated fighting positions were added through raised quarterdeck and forecastle structures. These platforms gave commanders better battlefield views and created defensive positions that were harder for enemy boarding parties to overrun during attacks. Height advantage was crucial in ship-to-ship combat situations. Hidden storage compartments became standard features. Secret spaces behind bulkheads provided secure storage for gold, weapons, and valuables that needed protection from enemies and crew members who might be tempted to steal. These hiding places were often cleverly disguised as structural elements. Boarding equipment was essential for the pirate business model. Grappling hooks and reinforced planks allowed pirates to transfer fighting men between vessels during attacks when they needed to capture enemy ships. Specialized tools made the difference between successful captures and failed attempts. A scary-looking ship was like wearing a convincing disguise. It did half the work before the fighting even started. Visual intimidation played a crucial role in pirate success by convincing merchant crews to surrender without battles. Fear was often more effective than actual firepower. Even the most perfectly designed pirate ship was just expensive driftwood without proper crew management. Operating a pirate ship required specialized knowledge, constant work, and careful organization to keep both the vessel and its crew functioning effectively in one of the world's most dangerous occupations. Crew sizes varied dramatically based on ship dimensions. Small vessels might operate with 20 men, while larger ships could carry 200 pirates. More crew meant more firepower, but also more mouths to feed and more personalities to manage. Finding the right balance between fighting capability and resource consumption was crucial. Specialized job roles kept operations running smoothly. The boatswain supervised rigging and deck work. Ship carpenters handled structural repairs. Sailmakers were invaluable because damaged sails meant dead ships. A good gunner was like a deadly librarian, organized, precise, and capable of creating very loud explosions. Each specialist brought skills that could mean the difference between life and death. Ship cooks had more influence than their job title suggested. Well-fed crews stayed loyal longer than men eating spoiled food. Quartermasters handled logistics and often mediated disputes between captains and crews during tense situations that could lead to mutiny. Food quality directly affected crew morale and fighting effectiveness. Written agreements weren't just romantic legends, they were practical management tools that outlined work division and profit sharing. These codes prevented arguments and established clear expectations for behavior, duties, and compensation during successful raids. Every crew member knew exactly what they could expect from their service. Daily maintenance tasks never ended. Ship structures constantly flexed, loosening planks and creating gaps. Sails suffered damage from wind stress. Ropes frayed from regular use and saltwater corrosion that ate away at the fibers. The harsh marine environment attacked every component of the ship constantly. Calm weather periods became intensive work sessions. Crew members scraped marine growth from hulls, reapplied protective tar, and pumped accumulated water from bilge areas that collected moisture from various sources throughout the ship. These maintenance periods were crucial for keeping the vessel seaworthy. A missing hammer might seem minor until emergency repairs were needed during a storm. Tool security was critical. Equipment was stored in locked chests to prevent loss or damage that could cripple repair efforts. Every tool had specific purposes and couldn't be easily replaced in the middle of the ocean. Emergency repair materials were stockpiled throughout the vessel. Extra timber, spare canvas, rope, and tar had to be immediately accessible because pirates couldn't visit ports for supplies when things broke during dangerous voyages. Self-sufficiency meant carrying everything needed for major repairs. It was like permanent camping, except the campsite floated on an ocean full of people who wanted to kill you. Self-sufficiency was essential for pirate operations in hostile waters. Every crew member had to be ready to handle multiple responsibilities when emergencies struck. The continuous cycle of maintenance kept these floating communities functioning as both workplaces and weapon systems in an environment constantly trying to destroy them. Building a pirate ship from scratch was an incredible achievement that required knowledge, skill, and determination. These wooden vessels became legendary symbols of freedom and adventure on the high seas. Pirates weren't just masters of finding treasure. They were champions of emergency repairs. While most sailors today call tech support when something breaks, these guys had to fix massive ships with nothing but whatever they could steal. Here's how they kept their floating homes from becoming coral reefs. When you're a pirate in the middle of the ocean and a cannonball rips through your ship, you've got bigger problems than spilled rum. Though I bet plenty of pirates would argue otherwise. Picture this. You're standing on deck, probably hungover from last night's plunder party, when boom, a British Navy ship decides to turn your vessel into Swiss cheese. Now you're ankle deep in seawater, and the ocean's getting a free invite into your ship. Not exactly the morning swim you had in mind, right? The first rule of fixing a cannonball hole is simple. Anything that can plug that hole becomes more valuable than gold. I once heard about a crew that stuffed their captain's prized silk shirts into a breach. Let's just say he wasn't too happy about his fancy wardrobe becoming fish food, but hey, better the shirts than the whole crew. The champion in these situations was something called oakum, basically old rope fibers soaked in tar. Pirates would always keep a good supply of this stuff handy because holes in ships were about as common as bad teeth in the 1700s. And trust me, that's saying something. Roughly 9 out of 10 sailors had some form of dental problems back then. The tar made it waterproof, and the fibers expanded when wet, creating a temporary seal that could mean the difference between sailing home or becoming a permanent underwater attraction. But if stuffing things in the hole wasn't enough, pirates would resort to a technique called fathering. Imagine trying to patch a hole in your jeans, except your jeans are underwater, and if you mess up, everyone dies. No pressure, right? They'd take a sail, cover it in tar and animal fat, then drag it under the ship like some sort of giant underwater band-aid. The pressure of the water would actually help press it against the hull, creating a seal. It was messy, dangerous, and about as elegant as a drunk parrot, but it worked. For holes above the waterline, pirates got to play carpenter. If by carpenter, you mean someone desperately nailing planks of wood while probably getting shot at. They'd slap wooden patches over the holes faster than you could say incoming, then seal the edges with tar. Fun fact, the tar they used was actually pine tree sap that had been heated until it became thick and sticky. Pirates called it black gold because it was literally worth its weight in gold when you were taking on water. Some clever pirates figured out that bread made an excellent emergency plug for small holes. That's right. The same stuff you make sandwiches with could save your ship. The bread would swell up when it got wet, creating a temporary seal. Though I have to wonder about the first pirate who figured this out. Oh no, we're sinking. Quick, throw the sandwich overboard. Not exactly your conventional thinking, but when you're desperate, innovation takes some weird turns. The most dangerous part of all this is that while you're trying to patch up your ship, you're basically sitting ducks. Every minute spent hammering planks or stuffing holes is a minute you can't fight back. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite like trying to nail a plank straight while cannon fire whistles past your head. It's like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake on a boat while someone throws firecrackers at you. But perhaps the most impressive thing about these emergency repairs wasn't the techniques themselves, but how quickly pirates had to learn them. You didn't exactly get a training manual when you joined a pirate crew. It was all hands-on learning, usually in the worst possible conditions. Imagine your first day on the job, and suddenly you're expected to know how to stop a ship from sinking using nothing but old clothes and tar. Talk about a steep learning curve. Of course, plugging holes was just the start of a pirate's repair worries, especially when the wind picked up and you heard that dreaded cracking sound from above. Every pirate's worst nightmare, the mast giving up on life. And trust me, when a 60-foot wooden pole that weighs as much as 3 elephants decides to call it quits, it's not exactly a quiet affair. There goes your afternoon nap, and probably your entire week. You'd be surprised how often this happened. Back in the golden age of piracy, about 1 in every 4 ships suffered major mast damage during long voyages. Why? Because apparently, Mother Nature thought it would be hilarious to test just how much wind a tree-turned pole could handle. Spoiler alert, sometimes not as much as you'd hope. Now, pirates had 2 options when a mast broke: replace it or fix it. Replacing sounds easier, right? Wrong. First off, spare masts were about as rare as honest politicians in the 1700s. Most ships couldn't even carry full-size spares because they took up too much space that could otherwise be filled with more important things like rum, gold, or more rum. So what did they do? They got creative with repairs. And by creative, I mean they turned into maritime MacGyvers. The first step was getting everyone to stop panicking and cursing, which, given that pirates weren't exactly known for their calm demeanor, was like trying to convince a cat to take a bath. Once that minor miracle was achieved, the real work began. The most common fix involved something called splicing. Basically, you're trying to convince 2 pieces of broken mast that they're still one piece. It's like relationship counseling for wooden poles. You take the broken ends, line them up just right, and start wrapping them with more rope than you'd find in a hangman's warehouse. Some clever pirates figured out that heating the ropes made them shrink as they cooled, creating an even tighter grip. If you were lucky enough to have iron hoops on board, these would get hammered around the splice. It was like putting a cast on a broken leg, except this patient was vertical and the size of a small building. The whole process took hours, and one wrong move meant starting over, or worse, watching your handiwork collapse and taking half the rigging with it. The biggest mast ever repaired at sea was on a Spanish galleon in 1742. The repair job took 3 days, used up nearly 1,000 feet of rope, and somehow stayed intact long enough for the ship to make it to port. The crew celebrated by drinking so much they couldn't climb the newly fixed mast for 2 days, though that might have been a blessing in disguise. The real test came after the repair was done. You had to raise the sails slowly, holding your breath and probably saying every prayer you knew in every language you could remember. It was like trying to fly a kite made of gold. You really, really didn't want it to crash. The whole crew would watch, waiting for either success or spectacular failure. There was no in between, but even if you managed to fix the mast, you still had to keep an eye on it. These repairs weren't exactly shipyard quality, they were more like maritime duct tape. Good enough to get you where you needed to go, but not something you'd want to bet your life on in a storm, though sometimes you don't have a choice. You know what made all this even more challenging? Trying to keep your balance on a rocking ship while doing all this repair work. At least the holes in the hull had the decency to stay at deck level, but mast repairs? That was like trying to do construction work on a tightrope during an earthquake. But even with a perfectly repaired mast, you weren't going anywhere if your sails looked like they'd been through a cat fight. You haven't seen true despair until you've watched a pirate trying to sew a massive tear in a sail while the wind's doing its best to turn that same sail into the world's largest kite. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a mechanical bull. Only the bull is in the middle of the ocean, and your thread is as thick as a shoelace. The needles pirates used were no joke either. They were basically mini swords about the size of your hand and heavy enough to double as a weapon in a pinch. Fun fact, these sailing needles were so valuable that some pirates included them in their treasure shares. Imagine being the guy who got a needle instead of gold during the loot split. Talk about drawing the short straw. Sailors had a special way of sewing sails that they called palm and needle seaming. The palm part came from a thick leather pad they wore on their hands. Without it, pushing those monster needles through thick canvas would have turned their hands into something that looked like they'd arm wrestle a porcupine. Even with the palm protector, most sail menders had forearms like blacksmiths from all the pushing and pulling. A typical pirate ship in the 1700s carried around 7,000 square feet of sail. That's about the size of 3 tennis courts, and every single inch of that massive area needed to be maintained. The thread they used wasn't your grandma's sewing kit variety either. It was waxed twine thick enough to hang your laundry on and coated with beeswax to make it waterproof. Some clever pirates figured out that coating the thread with tar made it last even longer, though it made the whole process messier than a toddler's first attempt at finger painting. But what happened when a sail was too far gone for repairs? That's when things got really interesting. Pirates were the original recycling experts. They'd cut down damaged sails to make smaller ones or turn them into anything from clothes to bags. Some creative crews even made temporary shelters out of old sails during island stops. One famous pirate ship reportedly had a complete set of sail canvas hammocks for the entire crew. Talk about sleeping in your work. The real nightmare was trying to replace an entire mainsail. Ever tried to fold a fitted sheet? Now multiply that frustration by about 1,000, add some waves, and throw in a few angry seabirds who think your new sail is invading their airspace. That's what pirates dealt with when installing a new sail. Sometimes they'd resort to stealing bed sheets from captured ships because nothing says fearsome pirate quite like sailing under grandma's floral bedding. You might think all this sewing would be a peaceful activity, a nice break from all the plundering and pillaging. Wrong! Try concentrating on your stitches while the lookout's screaming about approaching ships, or when there's a storm brewing that could turn your careful needlework into confetti. It was like trying to do delicate surgery during a boxing match. Did you know that some pirates became so good at sail repair that they could actually tell what ship was approaching just by looking at the patch patterns on its sails? It was like a criminal's version of reading fingerprints. Oh yeah, that's definitely Captain Johnson's ship. I recognize that terrible stitching job from the Battle of Bermuda. But even with the best maintained sails in the Caribbean, you weren't going anywhere if you couldn't control where those sails were taking you. Losing control of your ship because of a broken rudder was like trying to ride a blind horse that's had too much coffee. You might be moving, but good luck telling it where to go. And let me tell you, nothing sobers up a crew faster than hearing that sickening crack from the stern, followed by the wheel spinning freely like it's auditioning for a windmill. The rudder was basically a giant wooden paddle stuck on the back of the ship, and it had one job: steering. But boy, when it failed spectacularly. About 40% of all shipwrecks in the 1700s were caused by steering problems. That's right, almost half the ships that never made it home got lost because they couldn't turn properly. It's like trying to drive a car with no steering wheel, except the car is the size of a house and floating in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes the rudder would just get loose. That was the easy fix, if you can call hanging off the back of a ship with a hammer easy. Pirates would have to nail it back in place with wooden pegs and iron spikes, all while trying not to become fish food. The real fun started when waves kept smashing against the rudder during repairs. One minute you're hammering away, the next you're getting a surprise swimming lesson. But when the rudder actually snapped off, that's when pirates had to get creative. They'd rig up what they called a jury rudder, basically a heavy plank tied to the stern with more rope than you'd find in a hangman's annual convention. Getting this makeshift rudder to work was about as graceful as teaching an elephant to ice skate. It took at least 6 strong men to control it, and they had to coordinate like a synchronized swimming team, except with more cursing and less pointing of toes. The worst part wasn't even the physical labor, it was the math. Yes, you heard that right. Pirates had to do geometry. They needed to calculate the right angle for the temporary rudder, or they'd end up going in circles like a dog chasing its tail. Here's something that'll make you appreciate modern shipping. The biggest temporary rudder ever rigged was made from 3 dining tables lashed together. The crew had to sacrifice their eating space for 2 weeks while they limped to port. They ended up eating their meals sitting on cargo boxes, probably plotting mutiny between bites. Pass the salt, and maybe we should have kept at least 1 table. The heroes in these situations were the poor souls who had to swim under the ship to attach ropes or check the damage. Remember, this was before scuba gear or even proper goggles. These brave pirates would dive down with a rope in their teeth, probably wondering if this was really better than their old job as a farmhand back in England. Some clever crews developed a system of pulleys to make steering with a jury rudder easier, but this often resulted in an elaborate web of ropes across the deck. Walking around became like playing the world's most dangerous game of hopscotch. One wrong step, and you'd either trip a rope controlling the ship's direction or get tangled up like a fly in a spider's web. But hey, at least rudder problems kept you on your toes, literally, since you had to constantly adjust your balance as the ship wandered all over the place. The real headache came from the constant drip, drip, drip of water finding its way into the hull. You know, every wooden ship leaked. That wasn't a design flaw, it was just a fact of life, like taxes or bad weather during vacation. The average pirate ship took on about 200 gallons of water every day, which meant crews spent more time moving water out of their ships than most people spend watching TV today. Keeping up with the leaks was like playing whack-a-mole with water. Plug one hole and another one would pop up just to spite you. The pirate's secret weapon against leaks was something called caulking, which sounds fancy but really just means stuffing things into cracks until water stops coming through. The gaps between wooden planks were their worst enemy. Over time, they'd open up like a yawning mouth, letting in enough water to make even fish uncomfortable. The process of fixing these gaps was about as pleasant as a dentist appointment, only longer and wetter. Pirates used this stuff called oakum, old rope fibers soaked in tar, to fill the gaps. But it gets interesting when the best oakum came from old ship's ropes that had been used for years. Why? Because these ropes had been soaked in salt water, tar, and who knows what else, making them perfect for plugging leaks. It's probably the only time in history when having old, worn-out equipment was actually better than having new stuff. The fun part is when they had to apply hot pitch over the oakum. Pitch was basically tree sap that had been heated until it became thick and black, like molasses from hell. The smell was so bad it could make a skunk apologize, and it stuck to everything. Clothes, hair, skin, you name it. Some sailors swore their grandchildren were born with tar stains because of how much the stuff got into their blood. Pirates sometimes mixed animal fat into their waterproofing cocktail. They'd save every bit of fat from their meals for weeks, rendering it down to mix with the pitch. Imagine cooking dinner and instead of throwing away the bacon grease, you save it to fix your house. That's basically what they were doing. The record for the most animal fat used in one repair job was held by a Spanish galleon that reportedly used the equivalent of 50 pigs worth of fat. Talk about bringing home the bacon. The job of actually applying this goop was usually given to the newest crew members, because apparently welcome aboard meant here's a bucket of burning hot tar. Try not to drop it on yourself. Working with hot pitch was like trying to paint with molten lava. One wrong move and you'd have a souvenir scar to remember it by. Some pirates got so covered in the stuff during repairs that their crewmates started calling them tar babies. Though you'd better believe those nicknames were only used behind their backs. But this wasn't a one-and-done job. Ships needed constant recaulking, especially in warm waters where the wood would shrink and expand like a breathing thing. A smart crew checked their caulking every few weeks, which meant someone was always covered in tar. You could usually tell how well-maintained a pirate ship was by how many of its crew members had permanently black hands. Sometimes patching leaks just wasn't enough, and when that happened, there was only one solution: finding a nice, quiet beach where they could do some major repairs. Careening, as pirates called it, meant deliberately running your ship onto a sandbar or beach during high tide. When the tide went out, your ship would lean to one side, exposing the hull like a whale taking a sunbath. Did you know that ships in the 1700s had to be careened about every 4 months? That's because these wooden vessels collected more unwanted passengers than a free bus ride. Barnacles, seaweed, and these nasty little creatures called shipworms would stick to the hull. The shipworms were the worst. They weren't actually worms, but more like tiny clams that loved eating wood. A bad shipworm infestation could turn your hull into Swiss cheese faster than you could say, abandon ship. The whole process was like a twisted version of a ship spa day. First, they'd scrape off all the sea creatures, a job that probably made cleaning your shower look like a vacation. Some ships collected up to 2 tons of barnacles. Then came the really fun part, checking every inch of the hull for damage. Any spots that looked suspicious got the full treatment. New planks, fresh oakum, and enough tar to make an oil company jealous. But the catch is that while your ship was getting its beauty treatment, you were basically sitting ducks. Pirates had to post lookouts everywhere because nothing says perfect target, quite like a ship stuck on its side on a beach. The famous pirate Bartholomew Roberts once lost his ship to the British Navy during careening. Talk about bad timing. It's like getting caught by your parents while dyeing your hair blue. The work itself was no picnic either. The entire crew had to help, and it was all done under the burning sun. They'd coat the entire hull with a mixture of pitch, tallow, and something called sulfur, a combination that smelled worse than a middle school locker room after gym class. But this cocktail of stinky stuff was like sunscreen for ships. It kept the nasty sea creatures from making your hull their all-you-can-eat buffet. Some clever pirates came up with a ranking system for beaches good for careening. The best ones had deep water close to shore, lots of trees for cover, and fresh water nearby. The worst ones, well, let's just say more than one crew had to abandon their repair job halfway through because someone spotted Navy sails on the horizon. Nothing motivates a repair crew quite like the sight of enemy ships. Suddenly, everyone becomes a master carpenter. This might seem like a lot of work just to keep a ship floating, but that's exactly what made pirates so impressive. They kept their ships running with nothing but ingenuity, determination, and enough cursing to make a sailor blush, which, when you think about it, they already were.